Sean, what more do we know? This is confirmation, obviously, of what we originally suspected. Anything else you can tell us?
Yeah, but it's probably worth just going over the background. This is Wednesday last week, an Embraer jet crashed. There were 10 bodies allegedly on board. The manifest had 10, 3 crew, 7 passengers, which allegedly included Yevgeny Prigozhin and some of his henchmen. But of course, there were sceptics at the time who wondered whether he was actually on the flight at all, whether this might be some sort of front for him continuing to survive despite what he did. And of course, the investigation that's going on is a Kremlin-sponsored investigation. It's almost certainly the Kremlin were involved in the initial decision to bring down the aircraft. So there's a somewhat degree of scepticism, and that the conclusion of all these reports is already written. But will the proof actually be available to everybody else? If Prigozhin had remained alive and ever popped up on a Caribbean island wearing one of his infamous wigs, what would be the impact on Putin? He would have looked thoroughly weakened. If you remember, Prigozhin survived over 2 months after his abortive coup attempt. Many were questioning why Putin hadn't acted swifter. It appears now that the action has been taken. It suits the Kremlin for them to assert that he's dead, and therefore releasing this information a bit earlier than we would normally expect to see it is very convenient for the Kremlin, regardless of the circumstances. But if you're asking me as a military analyst, almost certainly he was on that plane and almost certainly he died. And
it's going to be interesting, isn't it, when they eventually, whenever that's going to be released, what they say happened. Obviously, you've got to take everything with a pinch of salt, but that is what everyone's sort of looking at. What is the official, in inverted commas, explanation as to what happened to that plane?
It'll be fantastic to see what sort of story they can fabricate about this, because most of the facts, if you look at the catastrophic consequences of the accident, we've seen the video footage of it falling, which is very difficult to doctor. This was falling out of the sky, almost certainly some sort of explosion. And quite how the Kremlin will fabricate a story around that will be interesting to see.
Yeah, and then we're also obviously talking about, in Ukraine, an accident that happened with 3 pilots being killed, one of them very famous, who we spoke to a couple of months ago. Tell us a little about that.
Yes, this was President Zelensky last night at his nightly address, said that 2 L-39 training jets had collided in a training mission, and 3 pilots, including, as you say, Juice, who was a very experienced combat pilot, but also he did a lot of media work. Our own Deborah Haynes had interviewed him as well. And part of this was supporting President Zelensky, who's really keen to make sure that the war stays at the top of the media agenda. Now, there's lots of speculation about what happened. An eyewitness thought they saw the aircraft parting and then coming together again some distance apart. All of that is conducive with they were doing a combat mission, as we used to do ourselves on the front line. You go up as a pair of aircraft, you'd separate for a few miles, then fly straight at each other. And as you pass each other, now it's game on and you try and get behind each other. But the closing speed is well over 1,000 miles an hour, and you're only meant to be passing quite close aboard. With seasoned pilots on board, that would cause a disastrous accident. None of the pilots would survive. They wouldn't even seek to eject. The challenge, of course, the implications of this are Ukraine has been desperately keen to F-16s. President Zelensky only the other day was sat in an F-16 as some of the nations in the West announced they were going to provide them. The jets is not the issue. It's the pilots, particularly well-trained pilots, and Juice, amongst others, would have been an invaluable part of that. So the tragedy here today is I've lost a few colleagues in flying accidents. There'll be families who will be missing 3 loved ones who've lost their lives in a training exercise. But more importantly, probably strategically for Ukraine, they've lost 3 pilots, which they can ill afford to lose at this phase in the war.
Yeah, absolutely. Two stories that we've covered there. Sean Bell, thank you very much indeed. That's Sean Bell, our military analyst. Thanks so very much.